9. Humber Forts. Built at the entrance of northern England's Humber estuary starting in 1914, the Humber Forts consist of two large fortifications known as the Bull Sand Fort and the Hale Sand Fort. Measuring more than 82 feet, 25 meters in diameter, each structure sits 59 feet or 18 meters above the water. The forts were built to house 200 soldiers each, but they never ended up being used during World War I as planned because they weren't finished until shortly after the conflict ended. They ended up proving useful during World War II when they were reactivated and modernized. During the war, the structures regularly took a beating from enemy aircraft. After the war, they no longer served a practical purpose, and in 1956, they were abandoned. The forts still stand today, and in 2022, Bull Sand Fort was auctioned off. Located roughly a mile and a half, 2.4 kilometers from shore, the four-story building's seaward side is covered in a foot, 300 millimeters of armor. It was listed at a starting price of £50,000 and was sold for £490,000. Hale Sand Fort, which is the smaller of the two buildings, is also privately owned by an unnamed buyer, who purchased it at an auction in 2018 for £117,000. It's unclear what the fort's owners plan to do with the properties, which are protected from demolition by law as historical sites. Past sellers have recommended repurposing the sites as homes, Airbnbs, restaurants, and tourist attractions. Whether any of these ideas come to fruition remains to be seen. 8. Lovelady Survival Bunker. Deep in the wilderness of Houston County, Texas, there's a 120-acre, 49-hectare property with a 1,000 square foot, 93-meter squared bunker with enough room to comfortably house 14 people. Hidden among the trees, the subterranean survival structure is protected by a steel outer door and impenetrable interior doors. The inside is basic, but contains a lot of conveniences that many bunkers lack, including access to well water, a fully functioning kitchen and dining space, and a large room that could be used as a common area or an extra bedroom. It could easily serve as a full-time home, but the property is also big enough for the owner to build houses on. The bunker is located 8 miles, 13 kilometers from the historic railway town of Lovelady, which is home to less than 600 people and is just a 20 to 30-minute drive from more populated areas. It's also in a secluded enough area for its occupants to live separately from the rest of the world if they wish to do so. It's been on the market since 2023 and has a current asking price of $1.1 million. 7. Evergreen Crystal Palace. Robert Plaster was an incredibly wealthy entrepreneur from Missouri who founded the energy supplier Empire Gas and numerous other enterprises. During the 90s, he had a 30,000 square foot, 2,787 meters squared mansion built on a large hill overlooking Table Rock Lake in Branson. Known as the Evergreen Crystal Palace, the 14-bedroom home contains a 20-car garage, a helicopter pad, multiple kitchens, housing quarters for live-in staff, a shooting range, and other luxurious amenities that most of us can only dream of having. Each bedroom is themed and decorated with expensive artwork from around the world. At one point in time, Evergreen Crystal Palace was the most expensive home ever built in Missouri. It remained in the family after Plaster passed away in 2008, but nobody currently lives there. In fact, the house looks like it hasn't been used since it was built, and it definitely hasn't been updated much since then. The decor, furniture, and appliances are visibly dated, but in spectacular condition. Everything looks brand new, making a walk through the mansion feel like a literal step back in time. The Plaster family decided to sell the home last year after the estate's trustee had a health scare. Real estate agent Ken Coleman came out of retirement to sell the mansion, which is on the market for $80 million. He invited YouTuber and urban explorer Big Banks to the property in hopes of attracting potential buyers. The marketing strategy appears to be helping. The day after the influencer's video launched, Coleman received 68 phone calls from interested parties. Robert Plaster was entirely self-made. He worked hard all his life and always made it a point to give back to the community. In honor of his giving spirit, proceeds from the sale will fund college scholarships. 6. Fort Wingate. Outside Gallup, New Mexico, there's an entire abandoned army base and a surrounding village that went up for sale for $11 million in 2021. Known as Fort Wingate, the 18-acre, 7.3-hectare settlement was founded in 1867. Before it became a military base, the property was part of the Navajo Nation and Zuni indigenous tribes' ancestral homeland. After living on the territory for centuries, the occupants were forcibly removed by the U.S. military. The land was redesignated as a reservation, and residents were eventually allowed to return. But they had no say in whether or not they agreed with the military base being built on their territory. Over the years, Fort Wingate went on to serve as a detention camp during the Mexican Revolution, an ordnance depot, and eventually a school. At one point, it was home to an African-American Army brigade called the Buffalo Soldiers. During World War II, the site housed the Navajo Code Talkers, who created a code based on the Navajo language. When the property went up for sale in 2021, it had been under the same family's ownership since 1946. During that time, the most recent owner was the town's landlord, police chief, and fire chief. Today, the former base contains both indigenous ruins and disused military buildings. It also has an old trading post, cafe, post office, convenience store, gas station, and hookups for 80 RVs. 5. The Golf Ball. Just 30 minutes outside the Scottish capital of Edinburgh, there's a former top-secret NATO spy base with a building that looks like a massive golf ball. Known as a SATCOM-2 satellite ground listening station, it was built on the decommissioned World War II airfield RAF Ballado Bridge, which served as a training facility for Polish pilots during the conflict. The 60-foot-tall, 18.3-meter golf ball is what's known as a radome. Opened in 1985, it housed a satellite dish which was used for intercepting communications and picking up messages from aircraft. For 20 years, the dome's equipment picked up satellite correspondence, including Russian ballistic missile launch orders. A corridor built to withstand attacks of all types, including nuclear blasts, connected to the golf ball to a main equipment building. The property also had a mess hall, a recreation hall, 2 runways, a control tower, several garages and offices, and a guardhouse. It's surrounded by a burglar-proof, double-layered security fence, although it has seen its fair share of burglaries in the years since it became abandoned. Although the site wasn't officially decommissioned until 2006, it fell largely out of use during the mid-90s. From 1997 to 2014, it hosted an annual music festival. By then, the property had been purchased by an entrepreneur named Bob Ferguson. But he never did anything with it. And in 2014, it was back on the market. For the next 7 years, real estate agents did everything in their power to try attracting a buyer. At one point, the seller dropped the asking price from £950,000 to £650,000 in hopes of finally getting rid of the disused station. As of 2021, many parties had shown an interest in buying the 6-acre, 2.4-hectare site, but nobody had committed to becoming its new owner. Finally, in 2023, Aerospace Kinross proposed turning the property into an air and space museum. The project was approved, along with a 7-figure grant to put toward expenses, and it appears as though the site will finally be put back to use after years of languishing with an uncertain future. 4. Fort McClellan Barracks. Located near the city of Anniston, Alabama, Fort McClellan was first established as a military property during the early 20th century. During World War II, it served as one of the Army's largest installations. More than 500,000 troops trained there throughout the conflict. From 1975 until its closure in 1999, Fort McClellan served as the headquarters of the Military Police Corps and a military police training program. It was also home to the Chemical Corps School, which trained service members in chemical warfare, and a U.S. Border Patrol training facility. During this time period, roughly 10,000 military members were stationed at the base. which employed around 1,500 civilians. For many years after being decommissioned, the property underwent unexploded ordnance removal. Since 2010, a portion of the former base has been repurposed as a mixed-use community, while other parts are still being used for training by the Alabama Army National Guard. Much of the original site remains abandoned, including a 117-acre, 47.3-hectare parcel containing nearly 1 million square feet of old buildings, including Army barracks known as starships. In February 2023, this particular property was listed for sale for $1.5 million. Just a few months later, news outlets reported that an interested buyer was in the process of negotiating the site's purchase with the seller. Nearby residents who spoke with local station ABC 3340 said that they hope to see the property redeveloped in hopes that it will bring more activity to the area, which suddenly grew quiet when the military cleared out. 3. Lookout Mountain Radar Station. During the Cold War, 28 radar stations were established along the northern U.S. border with Canada. They were used for detecting any potential incoming aircraft or missiles from the Soviet Union. One of these remote sites, formerly known as Finland Air Force Station, is situated atop Lookout Mountain outside Finland, Minnesota. Located within the Superior National Forest, it's entirely surrounded by wilderness. The property was decommissioned more than 40 years ago in the early 1980s. It fell under private ownership with plans to redevelop it into a luxury home community, but the vision never came to fruition. While tearing down some of the old buildings and testing the septic system, the owner discovered contaminants in the water and ground. Decontaminating the site would be expensive, complicated, and time-consuming, and the project was abandoned. Today, many of the original buildings remain at the site, including 43 3- and 4-bedroom homes, which have started to deteriorate from neglect and vandalism. In 2022, the owner listed the property for sale in hopes of finding a buyer who has the desire to do more with it than they were able to do. Photos featured in the real estate listing show an eerie, crumbling road that leads to the site, old buildings lined up silently along cracked pavement, the interiors of homes that have been all but forgotten, and an abandoned school. The 100-acre or 40.5-hectare site is currently listed as off-market, which suggests that it's been sold to a new buyer whose future plans for the site are unclear. 2. Stack Rock Fort. Built in the early 1850s on an island in the Milford Haven Waterway, Stack Rock Fort sits about 800 yards or 732 meters from the shoreline in the Welsh town of Pembroke Dock. Consisting of a 30-foot, 9.1-meter tower, nearly 10-foot thick, 3-meter walls, and 3 large cannons. Its original purpose was to protect the nearby Royal Dockyard from an attack by sea. Faced by the increasing threat of an invasion by the forces of French Emperor Napoleon III, the British military upgraded the fort during the 1860s. By 1870, it contained a new battery capable of accommodating up to 175 soldiers and 5 officers. Most of the time, however, the base was home to just 30 soldiers and 1 officer. The fort underwent improvements multiple times throughout its use, but it only saw combat during World War I. It was decommissioned and disarmed in 1929 and subsequently stripped of useful materials. Since then, Stack Rock Fort has sat abandoned and in an increasingly deteriorated state. Because it's classified as a protected historic property, however, it cannot be demolished, and any structural changes require special permission from the government. In 2021, a company called Anonium bought the property from a private owner with plans to preserve it as a living ruin. The company's director told Atlas Obscura that the goal is to maintain the air of discovery and magic that the overgrown fort has captured in its decades of abandonment, giving visitors the feeling that they're exploring it for the first time. 1. K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. Located south of Marquette, Michigan, on the state's remote Upper Peninsula, the former K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base began as a local airport in 1937. After the U.S. entered World War II, the property was repurposed as a military base for protecting the nearby Sioux Locks. which facilitate travel between Lake Superior and the lower Great Lakes. In 1955, the property was taken over and expanded by the Air Force. It became home to a 12,366-foot-long, 300-foot-wide runway that was designed to quickly mobilize fighter jets. During the Cold War, the base was equipped for intercepting potential Soviet threats. Named after civil engineer Kenneth Ingalls Sawyer, the property operated under the military for 40 years until its closure in 1995. During its heyday, it was home to 12,000 people, making it the Upper Peninsula's largest city. The closure of the base negatively impacted the local economy. Today, the former base is home to the Upper Peninsula's busiest airport, but the rest of the site is abandoned. Included among the disused buildings are a hospital, dormitories, a bar and restaurant, post office, and a movie theater. In 2022, the property became available through a sealed bid auction. As of early 2024, it appears to still be available. Thanks for watching. Which one of these abandoned places would you buy? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.